Let's talk about rotation. Rotation is life, and let's talk about common injuries from lifting weights. Take powerlifting, for example. The powerlifting movement, the big three: the squat, bench press, and deadlift. It's very common, let's say, in a deadlift, someone hurts their back. And the most common denominator of why most people hurt their backs, let's say, is because they've lost their capacity to rotate. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, when you're lifting heavy weights, when you're really big and strong and you can push a lot of weight, there's a big trade-off in the amount of stability in those demands for mobility. So you have to get super tight, super compressed, so that you could produce a lot of force. Basically, that's what happens when you get really strong. And you can see that when someone really strong, when they have to sprint, they could run really fast because they could produce a lot of force, but they don't have a lot of rotation throughout their body. Their rotation is very limited. It kind of looks almost comical, but they're still very strong, right? So when you limit your outward expression of that rotational patterning, you're going to limit your inward understanding or expression of that rotational pattern. So basically, it's use it or lose it. So a lot of the injuries with weightlifting, say in the deadlift, is because you've lost that capacity. So you've overridden or over patterned the straight linear, more sagittal plane of motion, let's say, overload of that pattern, that so much to the point that you surpassed the threshold of the involved soft tissues. So you could rehab, get better, lift heavy weights again, only to injure yourself again. And you do this over time and eventually requiring surgery. They do the surgery, they repair the involved soft tissues. They may even fuse the vertebrae together. And now you got more stability, exactly what you trained for. And then you train on top of that. And you might feel stronger than before. And you might feel great. But, who's to say over time, if not in that area again, you could injure yourself or create more damage other parts of your body. So life is like a spiral, life is like a circle, life is rotation. If you've trained yourself to not respect and understand that and what that means to whatever activities, whether it's a very sagittal dominant activity such as deadlifting or lifting heavy weights, you're going to find that rotation somewhere else in the body, let's say, right? So let me give you a quick example. If my arm could move straight forward and back like this, I can only produce a certain amount of force and absorb a certain amount of force. But if I rotate my hand in like this, and as I turn it forward, I turn it out like this, okay? I'm still moving my arm through the same range of motion as if when I was going just forward and back. But now with this little rotation, I'm increasing, let's say, the surface area in which my arm could move. Let's say I'm increasing the range of motion in which these joints can move. I'm increasing the range of motion in which these muscles can function. And I'm increasing its capacity to absorb load and to produce force, all right? So compare that, all right, the rotation, with just straight movement. So when I start having injury because I'm just doing straight linear movement like this, and the involved tissues get injured, it's because I've surpassed their threshold for tolerance of that load or stress. But if I start increasing that rotation, now this motion, what I just did with my arm, my hand going in and out, is an outward expression of rotation. But let's say I just move my arm straight back like this and I'm not turning my hand, there's still an inward expression of that rotational patterning where even though my arm isn't fully moving, the muscles are still engaging as if. So I'm still potentiating their capacity, their potential to create rotational forces, which it's more of an isometric of the rotational pattern while there's actual movement of the arm going in a linear pattern. So an example of this, another example, and it's very common, but we don't think about it this way, is when people teach you how to deadlift or lift any heavy weights, they teach you to increase full body tension. Why do you think during squats they say turn your knees out or spread the floor underneath you or turn your elbows in or squeeze with your pinky and ring fingers or engage the lats or get the rib folds, or all these things. Those are all components of inward expressions of rotation, right? So you're tapping in to these sources or potential sources of force production and load absorption, okay? But you're not expressing it outwardly. You're not all over the place like this outwardly. That wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't be able to lift the load. But if you were to imagine, if you isometrically contracted those muscles that would normally create these rotational patterns outwardly, but you're isometrically contracting them, but if you could imagine if there was like invisible lines that were connected to those patterns, what you're doing is you're syncing all those together so that you can create an enormous amount of tension and you're not overloading one area per se, and then you perform the lift with less chances of overloading one area more than the other. So this came up because I have a client who was complaining of sciatic symptoms in his one leg, from prolonged sitting, like sitting in the car for 20 minutes, he'd get his symptoms. I have other clients who come in who think they're stiff and they want to increase their range of motion and their mobility, playing a sport or whatnot. So oftentimes it comes down to their limited understanding of what rotation is. So anyway, think about that, and thank you for watching this video.